Morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a scene outside one of the polling stations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They were holding elections.
Tout à l'heure là, c'est un centre, ma matériel, bande bimaki ega sikoyo, population panti yango. Nous sommes dans un centre précisément électoral. Machine à voter et bande kindaki et ega sikoyo. Qui sait sur l'embi ba injustice oyo. Qui sait sur l'embi. Qui sait sur l'embi.
This was somebody destroying the ballot boxes outside one of the polling stations. A familiar scene for Zimbabwe. We have just had our elections in August, and all the election observers, the AU, SADC, and even our own Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission condemned the process as a farce. 43 years after independence, and we can't hold free, fair, and credible elections. That really is a damning testimonial to our failure to govern ourselves. Zimbabwe was given a golden chance to get this right. The regional body in 2008 forced Robert Mugabe to accept the need for a government of national unity and democratic reforms. A government of national unity was formed, in which the two factions of the movement for democratic change were the partners to Zanu PF. The opportunity to implement the reform were there, but Robert Mugabe decided to bribe them with the trappings of high office and our MDC friends forgot all about the reforms. Zanu PF cronies during the GNU used to boast that Masvane Zanu MDC aziza kuchikanyerere. When they were asked why was the MDC failing to implement even any meaningful reforms. The irony is, some of the MDC leaders, like Professor Atham Tambara, have admitted that the MDC leaders took their eyes off the ball. And yet, there are many Zimbabweans out there who still refuse to accept that the opposition took their eyes off the ball. To what end and purpose? One would want to ask. But such is the mentality. And of course, the problem with having that mentality is that you fail to realize that Zanu PF has been able to rig elections post the GNU because MDC failed to implement the reforms. Zanu PF was able to rig the August elections because MDC failed to implement the reforms. Indeed, since the GNU debacle, MDC CCC leaders have participated in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that Zanu PF was rigging the elections, and knowing fully well that by participating, they're giving Zanu PF legitimacy. How so many Zimbabweans, even intellectuals, have failed to grasp that idea is one of the greatest mysteries of our time. MDC was formed in 1999 on the promise they would implement the reforms necessary to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The party name itself said it all. This is the movement for democratic change. How is it possible that even the intellectuals failed to realize what those democratic changes are? And more significantly, now with the benefit of hindsight, why is it that Zanu PF is still able to rig elections? Because not even one meaningful reform has been implemented. And yet, some of these so-called intellectuals are at the forefront. They are the ones who are saying CCC is the best foot forward for the country. How can they be the best foot forward? They've failed to implement even one meaningful reform in 23 years, 5 of which they were in the GNU. We can bury our heads in the sand and pretend that CCC will implement reforms. The truth of the matter is they will never implement any meaningful reforms. If they fail to do so during the 2008 to 2018 GNU, when they had the golden opportunity to do so, it really is naive to think they'll do so now. This has been the tragedy of Zimbabwe. We are now looking at the 2023 elections were rigged. If CCC remain the country's main opposition the next 5 years, honestly, I do not see any meaningful reforms being implemented. And so come 2028, 5 years from now, we'll be going to another election. And with no reforms in place, it will be another rigged election. How is it possible that in this day and age, we are still failing to define what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections? We're still failing to define that. And so we are going through all these cycles of rigged elections, another rigged elections, another rigged elections. The primary purpose of a competent opposition was that they should implement the democratic reforms. Having failed to do so during the GNU, at least we should stop participating in a process that is so flawed. We know participating will only give legitimacy to the vote rigging Zanu PF. The interesting thing about it is that the ordinary people themselves are so easily conned into believing, into participating in these meaningless elections. In the 2018, Nelson Chamisa was the head of the main opposition party, MDC Alliance. And when he was constantly asked, why are you participating in these flawed elections without reforms? He finally turned around and said, MDC Alliance, we have implemented stringent measures to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. Of course, he was lying. Because the day after the elections, he was the one complaining that Zanu PF had stolen the elections. The same thing happened again this year, 2023. When people were asking, why are we repeating the same mistake? Why are we going to these elections without even something as fundamental and as basic as a verified voters roll? Nelson Chamisa turned around and said, I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. He and his Triple C friends were determined to participate in these elections, regardless how flawed the process is, for no other reason than greed. This we have known all along, and Zanu PF has exploited it. Zanu PF has known that as long as they allow the opposition to win some seats, they will participate, no matter how flawed the process gets. And we, the ordinary people, have been naive and foolish enough to believe the opposition when they say, oh, we'll win the elections. Chamisa was claiming that Triple C was going to win big these elections because he had plugged all the vote rigging holes. All he wanted was the few gravy train seats that he knew Zanu PF gives away to entice the opposition to participate. And even when the AU and SADC election observers had condemned the 2023 elections, that did not stop Chamisa's MPs, senators, and councillors taking up their gravy train seats. They didn't care that the process was flawed. All they wanted is their share of the spoils of power. And the people themselves were naive enough to think that was worth it. Comes back to what I'm saying before. Our failure to hold free, fair, and credible elections. We are looking at now 43 years after independence, and in 5 years' time, it will be 48 years after independence. We still can't do it. I think that is a damning testimonial to our failure to rule ourselves. It is a pity that we really have struggled to get first base. The Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, is part of the SADC region now. And it's not clear what's going to happen next. It has always, since the country attained its independence, has always been chaos and turmoil and killings, and it's been a nightmare. And the nightmare continues. I hope that SADC will try at least to do what they did to Zimbabwe in 2008. Force the various parties there into a government of national unity. And I hope that those involved in that government of national unity will have the good sense to implement the democratic reforms and get the DRC out of this cycle of rigged elections and bad governance. The irony is the DRC is probably one of the most richest countries in the world, not just in Africa, in the world. It has got so much potential, mineral wealth, that if those resources were used for the best of the people of DRC, there will be no need for them to be fighting. I know, for instance, I read a report that the River Congo has got hydro potential, that if it was all used, Zaire could supply the rest of Africa with their power, electoral power needs. The whole of Africa. Think of the revenue they will generate from that alone. And it being hydro, how much Africa would have saved in terms of the carbon, the greenhouse gases. Yet all that potential has never been put to good use because of the absolutely meaningless fighting. You can't even hold free, fair, and credible elections. And so the country has been thrown into chaos. Again, what a nightmare. A nightmare, I have to say. We in Zimbabwe, we are well familiar with it. We've just had our own nightmare. In fact, now the circus has not stopped yet. As soon after the August elections, as we know, we went into the phase of the recalls. And now we are going into the phase of recalls and by-elections. And before we know what is going on, we will be in 2028, fresh elections, and the opposition will be declaring once again that they will win the elections. And we are back to where we started. We can't even have the good sense to say to ourselves, okay, 23 years ago, this was the task we set for MDC, implement the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. 23 years later, we do not even have the good sense to say, okay, you have failed to carry out that task. Let's find somebody else who can. We still hope they will carry out that task. 23 years later. Why does it take 23 years? But here we are. It's unbelievable. Our inability to govern ourselves is a damning testimonial, whether we like to accept it or not. That is the reality. Before I conclude, I just wanted to read a comment from one of the people on the media. He says here is Zim youth. I believe we are stupid as Africans, and our African leaders are selfish, greedy, and corrupt. I see no reason to believe SADC can do anything. Well, I have to say that in this particular case, at least DRC deserve a chance. SADC did not do anything after Zimbabwe's rigged 2023 elections because SADC did do something in 2008, and we wasted that opportunity. And I honestly believe that one of the reasons why SADC decided to do nothing this time is because they knew that with the opposition, the quality of the opposition as it is in Zimbabwe right now, nothing of any substance could be accomplished. That's my intelligent guess. They haven't said anything themselves, but that is what I believe must have been their decision. And I'll be honest with you, I've argued on this platform that if they asked me for advice, I think that is exactly what I'd advise them as well. If Zimbabweans themselves do not know what the GNU of 2008 to 2013 was about and why did it fail, why would anyone believe there will be any wiser now? That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. That is the tragedy of nations that fail to learn from history. And we have failed to learn from history. But to end this on a more positive note, I believe if Zimbabweans really wake up to the reality and accept that the opposition has failed, and there's no two ways about it. And in this particular case, we have got to get a competent opposition. That is our starting point. As long as we still hang on to this belief that somehow Triple C will implement the democratic reforms and deliver free, fair, and credible elections, and Zimbabweans will live happily ever after. That is being naive, and it's not going to happen. And it is a pity that we still want to hang on to something that we know ourselves. It's not going to happen. If Nelson Chamisa and company failed to implement reforms during the GNU, when they had the Trump cards, they had the backing of SADC, they failed to implement even one meaningful token democratic change. What hope is there they will do so now? The best thing we can do is give the Triple C their marching orders and start the difficult task of finding competent opposition parties. The argument that we can't reject Triple C without an alternative is a vicious cycle. People will never look for alternative as long as they believe that what they have is working. And so far, Zimbabweans believe that MDC is their best foot forward. It is not. They failed to implement reforms in 23 years, 5 of which you were in the GNU. To keep on hanging on to that belief is to be quite honest, stupid. And we can't afford to do that in Zimbabwe. That is the truth. We'll have to wait and see what is going to happen in Zaire, Democratic Republic of Congo, rather. And I sincerely hope that SADC will come through and step in and give the people of the DRC a real opportunity to get their house in order. They could do with a government of national unity. They could do actually with an interim administration made out of technocrats. But I think probably selling it to the people, particularly those contestants, would be very difficult, as it was difficult to sell it to the Zimbabwe leaders in 2008. But even then, a government of national unity, if you have got the opposition that is really focused and committed to implementing the reforms, you can implement the reforms. You can get the country to clean up its institutions and be able to hold free, fair, and credible elections. It is not rocket science. It's just a question of you have somebody with the political will and vision to see it through. So my best wishes is to the people of DRC. I truly feel sorry for them. These coming days are going to be, I hope they're not going to be 10 bloody as the various parties fight over power. I hope that SADC will move in swiftly and establish peace, and so that the country can have a chance to implement the reforms and have free, fair, and credible elections. Other nations take it for granted, but by God, it has been a bridge too far for some of us. And we in Zimbabwe, we know that only too well. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much for those who were listening, and have a good night.